Hello, my name is Heather Pasha. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Palo Alto Networks. Thank you so much for listening in. Today, I'd like to talk to you about Zero Trust. And I know this is a topic that's being talked about quite often, but I thought maybe what I'd do over the course of the next 5 minutes or so is share with you some of the best practices that Palo Alto Networks is doing as we deploy Zero Trust in our own environment. Now, the definition of Zero Trust is very similar between Palo Alto as well as the UK's National Cybersecurity Center, in that it is the removal of implicit trust, or as the UK NCSC says, inherent trust, from the network or from the environment. We also believe that it needs to be an ability to validate essentially every stage of a digital interaction. Now, for Palo Alto, what we really wanted to do was focus really on three key aspects in our environment. We wanted to think about users, the applications, as well as, of course, the infrastructure itself. And across each of those three layers, what we really wanted to understand was how do you identify, the users or the applications or the infrastructure that's coming on? How do you define, obviously, the device or the workload essentially that's being used in that environment? And then, of course, what are the key elements of access that we should or should not allow using the principle of least privilege? And then finally, we really want to focus on making sure that the transaction itself is fully monitored and we can scan for malicious access and code and other types of challenges in those environments. Now, the UK's National Cybersecurity Center has these design principles that we're completely in alignment with. The first step, in fact, of the strategy that we used to deploy Zero Trust in our environment was to initially define our protect surface. And as the UK NCSC says, this is the part where you really need to understand your architecture, the users, the devices, the services that you're using. And so for us, it was identifying not just the data, but also the applications, identifying obviously our assets, and then really honing in on the types of services that are critical to our business. And what we learned as we went through this initial step was, as we went to various business units and parts of our organization to ask them what they felt was critical, of course, everyone came back and said everything is critical. And if everything is critical, then nothing is critical. And so we had to take a step back, use our steering committee, understand business metrics, as well as the right level of visibility to really then identify what was critical to our business. And what we did was we had a steering committee, or we still do have a steering committee that helps validate that we're on the right track in terms of identifying those critical assets. Step two for us was really focusing then on mapping the transaction flow. And so again, going back to the use cases or the principles from the NCSE, they kind of talk about the ability to kind of assess the user behavior and services and so on. And that's similar to what we would try to do as well. We try to identify the transaction flows amongst the critical resources that we had. In fairness, it took us a little bit longer, which I think generally does happen with most organizations, because this is the part where you really need to understand the flow of each of the transactions, not just between users, but between applications as well as the network environment as well. But as we did that and moved to stage three, which was really then helping to build out and architect our Zero Trust strategy, we started to use the principles of least privilege, micro-segmentation, monitoring east and west traffic. All of those were critical elements to how we built our Zero Trust environment, using, obviously our own resources internally, but also learning from, other organizations that have done this as well. So it is a very critical element and a key part of our sort of 5-step process that we used to build out Zero Trust. And then we moved to step 4, which is really understanding and creating those Zero Trust policies. And again, going back to the NCSC, they focus as a design principle where they start thinking about authenticating and authorizing users and really applying what we refer to as sort of the Skipling method of the who, what, when, why, and we sort of action those policies as well. This is where tools will help you. Depending on the tool that you're using, you can help build those right policies in the right areas. for us, building that policy enforcement point, as the NCSC calls it, is really critical. And then also building those policy engines within those enforcement points is obviously critical as well. So this fourth step, of course, being quite critical for us. And then finally, as we move to the fifth step, which was really around monitoring and just doing continuous monitoring, frankly, in real time, and maintaining the zero trust environment is a key part of what we're doing today. Again, going back to the NCSC, I think they do a really good job in identifying what you should focus on as you start monitoring the users, devices, and services. So it's absolutely a key area for us. And when we start looking at the transaction flows, what we really want to do is scan the environment for malicious activity, data theft, those types of key elements as well. So across those 5 steps, one of the key learnings we learned, and I'd love to share with you now, is that this is a learning curve, right? So there is a clear learning curve. You don't start from your crown jewels from day one. You want to start with sort of these learning use cases, followed by some use cases for practicing. And again, obviously continuing to learn from those practices. And then you start with the crown jewels. It could take you months before you get to the crown jewels, but it's, I think, an effort that's really well worth invested in your time and the resource, because when you do then start protecting your critical resources, you can then move on to the secondary and tertiary aspects of your zero trust strategy, which is generally where we are. And I think it is not a journey that will ever end, in our opinion. This is obviously ongoing, and there is no end state, and there is no product or service or solution, unfortunately, that provides zero trust. This is, of course, a key strategy, and we understand that. And so, if anyone's interested in learning more about any of the 5 steps I went through, please do get in touch with us. We'd be happy to share more details. And I think this is a key element for every organization to consider, regardless of industry or use case that you're thinking about. So thank you again, and have a great day.